Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am excited to present Simplify Professional Licensing for Architecture, Engineering, and Construction firms today because so many firms across the United States share a fundamental challenge: how to meet all of the regulatory requirements faced by AEC firms across the country. Perhaps your firm is facing difficulties maintaining and renewing licenses and managing qualifying engineers. Maybe you're looking to operate, hire, or employ people in other states. And perhaps you feel like you're reacting and responding rather than leading your firms through these events. It's even more important when new business opportunities arise, since firms need to be in good standing to bid on new jobs. I'm here to tell you that you're not alone and to share our experience in maintaining multi-state compliance. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. First, we have a relatively large number of attendees on the call today, and for that reason, the audience will be muted. Second, a reminder that today's presentation is eligible for continuing education credit through Earmark, so I'll go over how to get your CE credit at the end of the presentation. My name is Kevin Miner, and I am an account executive here at Harbor Compliance. My email address is listed here. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you think of a question after the call, whether that's today, tomorrow, or in the future. I'll also show my contact info again at the end of the webinar. And now a little bit about Harbor Compliance. We are experts in architectural, engineering, and contractor licensing. Since 2012, we've helped over 40,000 clients simplify navigating regulatory requirements. In the AEC industries alone, we have helped over 8,700 firms apply for, secure, and maintain licensing, business life cycle, and tax requirements. More about us later, but for now, we have a lot to cover, so let's dive in. First on today's agenda, we're going to cover the benefits of compliance and how it can help your firm strategically. Then we'll discuss what to expect in AEC firm licensing. This ties closely to the business entity issues that arise for firms expanding into new jurisdictions. Because these are regulated at the state and even local levels, we'll keep the discussion broad enough to address key concepts, but we'll illustrate a few examples that multi-state firms and many of you may be facing. We'll discuss the comprehensive management solution that firms need to comply with all regulations, avoid potential issues, and mitigate risks. And finally, how, with a proactive approach, firms can be better primed to compete. Many of you probably already understand the importance of licensing compliance because if you're a licensed architect or engineer, you've been maintaining a license since you graduated college. But it's essential to also consider how maintaining compliance can create value for your firm. One of the things that we'll cover today is why firms need to focus on both individual and firm licenses to maintain good standing and how those two things are interconnected. There are plenty of reasons why compliance is important beyond it just being the law. It unlocks opportunities. For example, organizations commonly list the states where they're licensed to operate on their website, and this is to highlight their reach and experience. Compliance enables firms to pursue new business, meet their timelines, and gain an edge over competitors that haven't been as proactive. It also safeguards your firm's reputation. Staying in good standing avoids penalties and avoids damaging how your firm is perceived. And it also upholds the overall professional standards of architects, engineers, and contractors. So there are clear benefits, but what does the licensing process actually look like? As professionals, you already know the basics of licensing. You know that AEC firms are regulated by state and local agencies for public safety reasons, and licensing helps build public trust that the bridges and buildings around us are safe and sound. You also know that the licensing process requires engineers and architects to complete professional education, sit for proficiency exams, and keep up to date with continuing education credits, which they then report to state licensing boards as part of renewing their licenses. You probably also know that firms also face licensing requirements. Before companies can apply for these firm licenses, known as certificates of authorization, they need to ensure that their legal entities meet certain requirements around naming, business structure, and ownership. Once those prerequisites are met, they have to register their legal entity with the Secretary of State. And importantly, they have to select at least one qualified individual as the professional in responsible charge, aka the qualifier, when applying for an AEC license. From that point, both the firm and the individual need to renew their license regularly, and the legal entity needs to maintain registration with the Secretary of State or local equivalent. The link between the qualifier licenses and the firm's certificate of authorization is absolutely key. If the qualifier fails to maintain their license, it puts the entire firm's ability to transact business in that jurisdiction at risk. Something that's vital to recognize is that even though each state might have its own unique requirements, which we'll dig a little bit deeper into later, they don't exist in a vacuum. In fact, nearly every licensing board asks about legal and financial penalties occurring in other states. That means that if you fail to complete your regular licensing requirements in one state, the damage can spread to everywhere you do business. In other words, when you lose good standing in one state, you might lose your eligibility to apply for licensing elsewhere. Now, I'd like to start our discussion on the four most common challenges that we see in managing AEC licenses. And those four are managing qualifiers, securing new licenses, managing renewals, and monitoring changes to requirements. Let's dive right in with managing the individual licenses of the professionals tied to your certificates of authorization. These are referred to by a lot of different names, such as professionals in responsible charge, managing agent, qualifying professional, etc. For simplicity, we'll use the catch-all term qualifiers. A qualifier is the licensed individual designated on your firm's license as being responsible for the firm's work in that state. As the saying goes, theirs is the license on the line. Managing qualifiers is critical for businesses because, as we just outlined, the licensure of these individuals directly impacts the overall standing of the firm's license. This quote from the state of Illinois illustrates how important this is. The design firm will become inoperable for all professions if the license of even one managing agent becomes inactive or not renewed. So you can see that's why it is essential to be on top of every single license for professionals in responsible charge or qualifiers at your firm. In most states, without a license qualifier, the firm's initial license application will be denied. Also, any change in the qualifier's information or a change in the qualifier altogether must be reported within a short period of time. Usually that's within 30 days, but in some states can be as few as 10 days. Now, we know that changes in qualifiers can happen for all kinds of innocuous reasons, such as an individual moving home address. They can also happen for more significant reasons, such as an individual departing the firm through retirement, resignation, or winning the lottery. Whether these changes are sudden or expected, firm management needs to be ready to update state licensing boards. If an existing qualifier leaves and no one holds the proper state license, someone is going to have to sit for the exam. And if the firm does not report the change, states can and do assess severe penalties for operating without a designated qualifier, up to denial of the firm's right to practice. Since nearly every licensing board asks about legal and financial action occurring in other states, the damage can spread across all of your businesses and range from financial to reputational and everything in between. This is why managing qualifiers is mission critical for the firm. Here's what you can do to meet this challenge proactively. First, know which qualifiers will be designated for each business entity in each state. Many states issue licenses to specific areas of specialty, such as structural versus mechanical for engineers and residential versus commercial for contractors. Firms that practice in multiple areas across states need to know the licenses for each. When attempting to register in a new state, this means any qualifiers generally must be licensed in advance. Firms must be proactive. No one wants to miss a key opportunity because a qualifier was not licensed in time. Next, ask your team. Do you know who your firm or client's qualifiers are currently? In which states and entities are they acting in that capacity? If that person leaves the firm tomorrow, who could fill the role within just a few weeks or maybe even a few days? Answering those questions will identify any gaps you need to address. Lapsed licenses may incur penalties to reinstate, so it's better to tackle these types of issues head on. Once your licenses are in order, work to identify individuals who could step in as a replacement qualifier. Firms should work towards having a contingency plan, especially in important jurisdictions. And you must consider the state processing time. We'll talk more about this, but you probably already know that licensure involves multiple agencies. Many licensing boards have only a handful of staff or meet on an infrequent basis, such as monthly or quarterly. Expediting an application simply may not be possible regardless of who handles the submission. The state of New York, for example, can take upwards of 4 months to approve the formation of a design professional corporation. And that's assuming everything was submitted in exact accordance with the state's rigorous standards. As a result, management must take a significantly longer term view with respect to licensing. Compliance becomes integral in the firm's ability to pursue out-of-state opportunities, as well as to maintain the right to practice on an ongoing basis. It is simply not possible to react and attempt to pursue licensure in response to an opportunity. Most times that opportunity will have passed. Finally, much like managing the firm licenses, firms need to invest in a way to manage qualifiers. An ideal solution includes software to track qualifier information across states, which gives management immediate visibility into who is licensed where and producing an actionable list of tasks whenever a departure occurs or is imminent. The next area I want to dig into is applying for professional licensure in the first place. There are over 800 state and local licensing requirements across the United States. Researching and understanding the varying requirements for each license type in each jurisdiction is a massive challenge. Each state may have business and licensing regulations with certain prerequisites involving firm licenses, individual qualifier licenses, and entity registration. It's important to understand the order in which license applications and supporting documents must be submitted. And not only do you need to apply for and secure these licenses, but you also need to communicate them with the rest of your firm. The marketing team wants to submit bids, but they can't bid in states where the firm isn't yet licensed. You need to make sure that they have clear insight into where they're already licensed so that they can act on new opportunities. Similarly, human resources might want to hire employees in a new state, but they don't know whether the firm is already licensed there, so they might miss out on highly talented candidates. One of the most common times that firms need to obtain new licenses is when they're expanding into other states, which brings us to the topic of foreign qualification. When registering for foreign qualification, the exact requirements can vary tremendously, and AEC firms are particularly susceptible to hyper-specific restrictions. First off, different states can structure the process differently and have varying forms that need to be filled out with the appropriate state agencies. For example, the Secretary of State, Department of Revenue, and licensing boards, all before beginning to transact business. Because of these differences, there can also be a huge variation in processing times and expected approval timelines. We'll take a look of an example of that in just a minute. It's also important to research each state's process and the order of operations between agencies when registering the business in another state, which we'll also dive deeper into in a minute. AEC firms face business structure requirements when foreign qualifying with the Secretary of State as well. You're probably familiar with certain professional entity types like a professional corporation, professional association, or a professional limited liability company, more commonly known as a PLLC. Professional entities are registered and named at the state level, and the requirements also differ from state to state. In addition, many states have distinct name requirements for AE firms. In most states, only companies that are authorized to practice architecture or engineering are able to use those specific terms in their legal name. Other states actually require that licensed firms use those terms in their name. For firms that were originally formed in states that don't require one of those words, they may need an assumed name in that new foreign state that includes that term in order to comply. And the forced assumed name must be used in state on everything from tax accounts, firm licenses, and even contracts and invoices. As a matter of consumer protection, states want the principles of AEC firms operating in their states to be licensed, hence qualified to run the practice. But states have varying ownership thresholds. That's one more thing you'll have to consider when expanding your business. And while you're entering all of these states, don't forget about tax registrations. As you go through the process of expansion, it becomes more and more challenging to lean on different tools and vendors. Centralizing your licenses via one platform can make the expansion process far easier, so you always know where to find the correct information. You can use the QR code on your screen there. We've put together a comprehensive guide to foreign qualification, so feel free to use that resource as needed. And now we'll move to our first poll question. And I'm going to launch it. So the poll question is, how is your firm currently managing professional licenses? Spreadsheet, internal system, third-party provider, or an attorney? Great. So it looks like a majority are utilizing spreadsheets, which is very common. We see that all the time. Thank you for your answer. We'll get back into the presentation. As I alluded to earlier, firms need to fully understand the order of entity structure, naming, and ownership requirements before attempting to register or pursue licensure in a new state. Because the order of operations between state agencies varies. In some states, like New York, an engineering firm actually has to begin the process of licensure with the state education department before it registers with the Department of State. But in other states, like South Carolina, the entity registration happens before the firm applies for its license. And in most states, at least one qualifier must first have their individual professional license. With all of these different requirements and restrictions, many firms end up creating new entities for their work in different states. That can allow them to better meet the structuring and naming requirements for each jurisdiction. The downside of that is that each entity has its own BOI filing requirements, so creating entities creates additional reporting on that side of life. Let's take a closer look at what it actually looks like to obtain licensure in a new state. In this case, we'll use New York. Here's an example of a fast-growing Maryland-based firm. They had an employee starting in the state of New York. They have an employee starting in the state of New York in a month. In New York, foreign registration with the Department of State can take several weeks on its own. To set up the domestic design professional corporation can take months, coupled with the time it takes the Department of Taxation and Finance to process tax registration applications and the Department of Labor to set up unemployment tax accounts. You can conservatively add another 3 weeks to a month. That means that you really need to get started a minimum of 15 weeks before the employee's start date. Any additional delay jeopardizes the firm's ability to onboard and pay that employee. Firms everywhere are running into the same issue. Setting up in each state, especially filing and securing the various registrations and accounts across agencies, takes time. With out-of-state registration, it's not practical to wait until you have an employee ready to start, and it's not efficient to repeat the scramble in each new state. Management and especially HR and legal teams need to be in lockstep, reviewing the hiring pipeline and ensuring registrations are in order as soon as it becomes feasible. The next area I want to focus on today is renewals. So you're all set up and fully licensed in a state, but eventually you'll have to renew those licenses. So what does that entail? To start, there are some obligations that every business has that must be renewed regularly. We've touched on each of these already. Qualifier licenses, firm licenses, Secretary of State registrations, and any unique or state-specific requirements. Renewal applications usually require proof of good standing from the Secretary of State as well. And keeping all of these up to date is important because there can be consequences if a filing is missed. If a business misses even a single filing, it immediately faces consequences that start with late fees and increase all the way to administrative action and the denial of the right to do business in a state. Administrative action can usually be undone by a process called reinstatement, where the firm pays all back taxes, filing fees, and penalty fees, but it's a costly and lengthy process. Not to mention the reinstatement becomes part of the business's permanent record. Sometimes firms that have an entity that no longer operate in a state, sometimes firms have an entity that no longer operates in a state, so they decide they don't want to pay the fees or keep up the obligations to maintain it. Then suddenly they find an opportunity in that state a few months later, but now they've fallen out of good standing and they have to play catch up. They end up paying more in reinstatement fees than what the original filing costs would have been. A more cost-effective option would have been to either withdraw the entity and re-foreign qualify, or to maintain a registered agent and file the necessary annual reports all along. In general, both maintaining an entity and closing it properly are less expensive and less risky than letting it lapse into noncompliance. So we've broken down the renewal process into 4 key steps: research, prepare, submit, and monitor. Let's start with research. The most important thing is that you take the time to know exactly what you need in order to file and renew all of your licenses. Yes, that includes most of the materials you originally submitted for your initial application, but requirements can also change year to year as state governments update their processes. Once licensed in a given jurisdiction, your firm will have license ID numbers, registration dates, renewal deadlines, and continuously changing requirements to navigate. With over 1,500 different AEC filings around the country, Keeping up with changes to requirements can be time consuming. And as the firm grows and becomes licensed in multiple jurisdictions or specialties, the complexity only increases. You also have to ensure that you capture any updated information from your registered agent, whether that's new qualifications, updated personal information like a changed name or address, or just a new registered agent entirely. You'll also want to check for any changes to your business formation documents. And maybe most importantly, you'll need to check for any changes to your state's forms and fees. In addition to updating their requirements, states are constantly changing the formats of their forms and exactly what information you need to submit. It can be tricky to stay on top of all of this. Step 2 is actually gathering all of the updated information to submit with your renewal application. There can be a lot to pull together here, so make sure you leave yourself adequate time and avoid late fees. Nearly every state requires business entities to file an updated annual report to ensure it keeps current information on record. Because each state has a unique deadline, a multi-state business faces deadlines throughout the year. Reports can be due on a yearly or biennial basis. You'll also need to file annual financial statements along with proof of your qualifier's licenses and their continuing education certificates. Make sure you're tracking these in one central location as they're completed throughout the year so that you don't have to hunt them down at renewal time. You'll also need to pull your current surety bonds and insurance documentation to ensure that those are in good standing and compliant with state requirements. Many states also require the business to file and pay taxes to maintain corporate good standing, such as California, New York, and Texas. Pulling all of these documents together every single time you have a renewal deadline, which, as we mentioned, can be at different times of the year for different states, can be a hassle. So it's essential to keep them stored in one central location to expedite the process. The third step in the renewal process is actually submitting your renewal applications, and the most important part here is to hit your deadlines. You don't want any unnecessary late fees or potential hiccups that could impact your ability to do business. Make sure you're tracking different states' different renewal cycles, whether they're yearly or every 2 years, whether they're on the first of the month, on the anniversary of your initial licensing, or a different date entirely. Many firms expect their individual engineers to manage their own continuing education and licensing renewals, but that can increase risk because the firm has no oversight. Because even a single lapse license from a qualifying engineer can have major consequences, the firm should invest in a solution that, at a minimum, gives management direct insight into the status of practitioners in any state and at any time. Finally, be aware that the more jurisdictions you expand into, the more complex and time-consuming this process can be. Be sure that you're allocating the proper resources and implementing the right systems to streamline them. Relying on spreadsheets and manual reminders runs the risk of critical lapses, leading to direct financial penalties. More importantly, it risks a gap in the ability to operate and secure new business in a jurisdiction. Finally, once you've finished your renewal application and it's been approved, you still want to monitor for any changes. As mentioned, state legislatures are always passing new regulatory bills and department level changes. It's vital that you stay up to date, which can be a bit overwhelming if you're in multiple states. Some states also require that you file immediate updates to your license if certain events occur. For example, I mentioned earlier that a change in qualifier requires an updated filing, typically within 30 days, but sometimes as quickly as 10. You need to make sure that you know exactly what events will trigger maintenance filings in each state so that you don't miss any deadlines. You also have to ensure that you're maintaining good standing with the Secretary of State and Department of Revenue in each state. This means staying up to date with taxes and fees, maintenance filings, documentation, and more. As mentioned earlier, many licensing jurisdictions stipulate that the business maintains internal records and follows certain governance or ownership requirements. These may or may not need to be reported on a license renewal application, but most licensing agencies have the authority to enforce and penalize governance violations. For example, we have one customer who's headquartered in Texas, but they now operate 23 wholly owned subsidiaries across 9 states. As they expanded, they found that some subsidiaries weren't keeping their compliance data well organized, and their executive administrator was spending more time on license filings than her primary job responsibilities. Once they switched over to our centralized platform, they were able to automate renewals, reporting, and other regulatory tasks and track updated requirements easily. So, to recap, there's a lot to keep track of, especially if you're doing business across multiple states. As you can see on the slide here, there are more than 800 different AEC licenses, more than 1,500 architecture, engineering, and construction contractor licensing filings, 2,000 plus United States filing authorities, and believe it or not, more than 20,000 unique filings. This includes Secretary of State, licensing and tax. And you also have to account for 50 states CE and PDH requirements. To best keep track of all of these changing requirements, we recommend a few best practices. First, be sure to conduct a review each year. This isn't just a review of your documentation and business information, it's a review of your internal processes. You should be looking regularly to see how you can better manage your internal records to make sure that you're ready to file quickly when the time comes, and also that the appropriate members of your team have access to your latest licenses and upcoming deadlines. Second, make sure to incorporate new requirements into your licensing and compliance management system. As those requirements change, manual systems like spreadsheets can quickly become outdated, so you'll need to update them regularly. Finally, allow ample time to complete new applications and filings. If there's one thing that you should take away from this presentation, it's that this process takes a lot more time than you'd initially think, so you should never wait until the last minute to start the renewal process. Now for a poll question on license management. So does your firm need or plan to register in additional states within the next 6 months? Give a few minutes for everybody to weigh in. So it looks like it's about 50-50, with some firms planning on expanding and others firms all set with their current footprint. Great. Thank you to everybody that responded. And now we will jump into proactive strategies for compliance. At this point, we've covered key licensing, entity, and tax issues, both as concepts and in example forms. Let's now talk about specific ways a firm can navigate this regulatory environment. It all starts with a proactive and comprehensive system for compliance. As you'll see, it involves a top-down strategy as well as the right people, process, and technology to execute. These are key components of what a proactive compliance system might include. 1, establishing a system for business information and records, tracking entity tax and licensing data, managing corporate tax and licensing filings, maintaining registered agents in each state, and timely notification of key staff. Second, it's important to have command of the renewals of firm and professional licenses, and to incorporate CE requirements and certifications. And finally, it's critical to define internal roles and processes. To be clear, every firm is unique. What we share here is general in nature and based on our extensive experience working with organizations of all sizes. But we encourage you to take these ideas back to your management teams and legal counsel in order to shape your overall compliance program. Harbor Compliance offers a solution to many of the challenges you've heard presented today. We've taken these strategies that we've discussed and built a suite of services and software around them. We've built cloud-based compliance software and continuously maintain a database of nationwide requirements. It keeps everyone in your organization up to date on your registration status in each state. It provides a secure, efficient, and effective way for your organization to maintain and access essential compliance information. Of course, organizations that register in multiple states and have multiple entities gain additional value. Access to our software is available as part of our managed services or as a standalone solution. There are 4 purpose-built modules: License Manager, Entity Manager, Tax Manager, and Records Manager. So when we talk about needing a single place to manage registration data, records, and reporting deadlines, our software modules do just that. They provide your organization with valuable reporting insights needed to easily assess where your business is registered as well. At this point, we want to thank you for joining us today. As I mentioned at the start of the presentation, today's session is eligible for continuing education credit through Earmark. You can use the QR code on your screen now to download the Earmark app, and after the session concludes, we'll email out a 5-question quiz. Once you've completed the quiz, you'll receive your CPE certificate. We want to thank you for joining us today and offer you a free compliance score. Well, we will verify your compliance status for various business entities you have set up nationwide. If you're interested in getting a free Harbor Compliance score, please let us know in the chat box or reach out to us after the presentation. And we've also come out with a new specialized AI research tool focused on AEC research. Reach out to us as well. We'd be happy to provide you with a free test search to see the type of information that it can help provide. With that being said, thank you again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your week.